Welcome back to the You Can Too podcast. On today's show, we have Light Watkins. He is a accomplished meditation teacher and best-selling author of multiple books. Like, I am more than grateful to have you on the show. For those who may not be aware of who you are, I know that you grew up with multiple uh, siblings, but what about your childhood do I have to know to know about who the man I am sitting in front of me is?
That's a good question. Yeah, I grew up in Alabama, which is in the southern part of America, United States,
Yeah.
and had a very happy childhood. Actually, I don't have some story of abuse or trauma from my childhood. The only trauma I experienced was it was just great, very boring growing up in Alabama, and I just couldn't wait to get away to explore other parts of the world. So, ironically, I was the only one of my three brothers who ended up getting away, going to bigger cities and exploring all the colors of life, and everyone else kind of stayed in the South. And so I don't know if there was if that seed had already been incubating inside of me to just question everything and to want a little bit more stimulation, both externally as well as internally. But yeah, I had very supportive parents. They they didn't have strong ideas about what I should do professionally, so I felt encouraged to just follow my curiosity, which is something I write a lot about today. And I'm fortunate and grateful for that because I know a lot of people didn't grow up like that. Um, if I didn't have that, I doubt that I would be where I am today.
Yeah, absolutely. And the book is a lot about that as well. I think that because of your journey and kind of like the path that you're on in the past 5 years, I guess since 2018, it's tough to see that it's not so much about the minimalism about, you're traveling, but more so about the minimalism of, the actual insight of what that looks like, the spiritual minimalism. So I'd love for you to dive into really what the mission is behind the book and really like what your core mission is for what you're doing today.
Sure. So I've written a few books.
Yeah.
First one was a book on happiness, and then I wrote a book on how to meditate in a way that doesn't feel like you're trying. And then I wrote a book on inspiration and how inspiration is everywhere.
Mhm.
And most recently, I wrote a book on the subject that is called spiritual minimalism. And it was an extension of a life experience that I had. In 2018, I moved out of my apartment in Santa Monica, California, and I just operated from a carry-on bag. And so I was traveling, probably circled the globe 2 or 3 times before the pandemic,
Yeah.
just doing my workshops, my retreats. I was teaching meditation, as you mentioned earlier, and giving talks. And the idea was to not look like I was living out of a carry-on bag,
Doing a
not to
good job.
have the capri zip on pants and all the like sort of camping gear that people wear when they're traveling from a backpack. I didn't want to look like that because I was still very much, giving keynote talks and being on panels, and
Mm.
I was dating and I was doing all the things, but I was just doing it from a carry-on bag. And then about a year into it, I downsized to a backpack. And so I've been operating from a backpack even during the pandemic. Um, and through that experience, I developed the framework of what I call spiritual minimalism. But the most important part of that philosophy is not living from a backpack. That was just my own version of spiritual minimalism.
Mhm.
I equate spiritual minimalism as anything that nudges you in the direction of your potential.
Mhm.
And I say that I became a spiritual minimalist not when I moved out of my apartment and got rid of all my stuff, but when I took my meditation practice seriously in 2003 after having dabbled for about 4 years in meditation. And it was through that practice that I created more internal spaciousness that allowed me to be able to take leaps of faith without clinging on to the comfort zone, which is what a lot of us do. We cling to our comfort, and it prohibits us from thinking that we are capable of moving in the direction of whatever our heart is urging us to do, which oftentimes points us towards the unknown. And that's very important to feel like you are emancipated from that comfort zone in order to be in the best possible position to take that leap of faith.
Yeah, and there's so many directions that I want to dive in. I want to talk about the heart voice. I want to talk about all of the there's your story is there's so many different points of it that I want to touch on, and I'm really grateful for you coming on again. The point first is discipline that you talk about is so much more about honesty than it is about really anything else. When it
Mhm.
came down to you taking your meditation practice seriously, what was it in 2003 that really changed it for you?
So, just to answer the previous point you made about discipline and honesty,
Yeah,
'cause it'll explain how I
of
took
course.
my meditation practice seriously. What I discovered about habit building is that it's not about discipline as
Mhm.
much as it is about putting yourself in a position where you can't really fail.
Mhm.
And people may look at me and my lifestyle and think, "Oh, Light, you have so much discipline. You know, you're doing all these things. You're writing a daily dose of inspiration email every single morning, and you meditate twice a day. It must require so much discipline. You don't drink alcohol. That must require so much discipline. You work out every day. Oh my God, you walk how many 10,000 steps a day? You're so disciplined." And that's not really how it works. I put myself in positions to do those things and give myself what I call in the book Travel Light the freedom of choicelessness,
Mhm.
right? And so the way I did that with meditation back in 2003 is I met a teacher and I felt this connection, this alignment with what was happening internally with this teacher. And I knew that he was meant to be my teacher. Now, he was also very expensive to work with. He said that if you want me to train you, the exchange is you have to part with a week's worth of your salary. And at the time, I was a young person. I didn't make
Oh
that
yeah.
much money. So a week's worth of my salary was about $300 because I was only making about $600 a week. And I went and checked my bank balance in the ATM machine, and it said that I had about $900 total. So I could have easily just justified, oh, let's take out a couple $100. No one would ever know. It was all anonymous, anyways. But I decided to take out $400, half my net worth at the time. And I knew that giving that amount of money was going to make me more committed
Yeah.
than I would have been had I tried to shortchange the exchange. And so that's essentially how it works. You want to commit yourself to things that you ultimately want to do. So for instance, with the step count,
Mhm.
right? I'll drive somewhere and I'll park a mile away.
Mhm.
So I have no choice but to walk if I want to get there. And a mile is 2,500 steps. That's 20 minutes. So you have to time it, right? You have to time it. But
Yep.
obviously, if I'm running late, I'm not going to do that. But I'll say, okay, I want to get steps. So instead of hoping and wishing and praying that I'm going to somehow find the motivation to go outside in the hot sun and walk around,
Yeah.
I'm just going to park a mile away. That way, I'm choiceless. I have to get steps. That's 5,000 steps to and from my car.
Yeah.
And so if I want to get 10,000 steps that day, I know I'm going to get about 2,000 just walking around my house because I've calculated that. I know I'm going to get another 5,000 going to that meeting. And then now I just need another 2,500. And, maybe that's about parking half a mile away to the place where I'm going to go have dinner. And I'll walk to the restaurant and back. So you can kind of think about your day in that way, and then you can paint yourself into a corner so that you too are choiceless in the matter. Working out, you bring a resistance band with you if you're traveling on the road, or you get an apartment right next to the gym somewhere, and then you make an exchange with a friend of yours and say, look, any day that I don't work out, here's $500 in cash.
Mhm.
Any day I don't work out, you keep 100 of those dollars. And then once I deplete all 500, I'll replenish with another 500 or whatever kind of arrangement you want. Like that's another way, because you're definitely going to think twice about skipping the gym.
Oh yeah.
If you know your friend is going to take 500 of your dollars, there's nothing you can do about it because you've already given them the green light to do that. So you have to find creative ways. If you're trying to cut sugar, get all the sugar out of your house. That way
Yeah.
you have no choice to go and dabble in the pantry and find the Oreos hidden behind the cans of tuna, because you're going to do that if you are hungry enough and feeling weak enough. So find creative ways, and that way you don't need to rely on discipline. Just be honest with yourself. I'm not going to resist the Oreos at 2 in the morning. I'm probably not going to go to the gym if it's too far away. I'm probably not going to get my steps in. That's the honest truth based on my past. So let me put stop gaps in place. And that's how you can create the willingness to do what you have to do, because you just don't have any other choice.
It's so powerful. I know that you did it for one of your books as well. You were going to pay a friend about $4,000, and it was like suddenly all the time in the world just started to show up, right?
Yeah,
And
I gave my friend a check for 4,000,
hmm
and I said, if I don't finish the manuscript by this date, then you are obligated to cash it and spend it on anything that has nothing to do with me. And this is after 3 years of stopping and starting and just being sick and tired of being sick and tired of not getting this thing done. So that's, I had reached my limit. I had done enough research and
yeah,
trying to find the motivation and just couldn't find it. So I had to take an extreme measure, and that was the solution, because I finished that book within a week of the deadline, just in case anything were to happen, because I don't want to risk. I couldn't afford to lose that kind of money, and that's the thing. We're going to put ourselves in a position where we just can't afford to lose. We can't afford to not be accountable. We can't afford to not follow through, and
yeah,
that's going to be different for everybody. Like for some of people, 4,000 may not be a lot of money, so you may have to up it to 50,000,
hmm
right? And or some people, $500 is the equivalent of my $4,000. So you have to find what works for you so that you stay accountable and focused on the mission at hand.
absolutely. I always say I say this for clients too, because when I made the first investment into myself, it was terrifying. I had $4,000 in my bank account. I put $2,500 down, and it was a $7,500 investment. I didn't even know how I was going to figure it out, but I said I'm gonna figure it out, and that was it. Was it was the I don't know how I'm going to figure it out that forced me to figure it out kind of thing. And I think that when you put yourself in positions to do so, that's how you figure it out. I feel for a lot of us, we put ourselves in positions, or even just in life, we feel that there's a certain path in life, right? And after you got out of college, you thought that you were going to be behind the camera, and you realized that it didn't work out that way. And there was a point in life where I think that you trust your heart voice, and you talk about this a lot. I'd love for you to dive into what that looks like, because I, I feel for this podcast, I trusted that for me. I'd love for you to dive into what that means for you. And I think so many of us need to do that more in our lives.
Well, I think you and I can agree that if both of us had not trusted our heart voice at various times, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Amen.
I don't know where I would be. I don't know where you'd be, but I know we wouldn't be having this conversation. So um, it's a scary thing to do, to trust the heart voice, because the heart voice, we call it the still small voice in
hmm
our culture, the still small voice, and that's the voice of inner guidance or the voice of intuition. And oftentimes it doesn't come with any degree of certainty, right? Versus the fear voice, the cautionary tale voices, the voices of social conditioning, which have all kinds of supposed certainty within those warnings. You know, if you do this, then that's going to happen. If you do
Right.
that, then this is going to happen. And if you bet on yourself, you're going to lose all your money, and you're going to da da da. You know, there's oftentimes the worst case scenarios that we end up getting fixated upon. But if we extrapolate it, I don't think we're really that concerned about losing everything. I think deep down we know we can get it back. But the thing that we are overly concerned about, if we're willing to admit it to ourselves, is how it makes us look. The fear of other people's opinions. We don't want to look stupid. We don't want to look gullible. We don't want to look, you know, whatever we think other people are going to think about us if this thing doesn't turn out the way we want it to turn out. And so that's an opportunity. When you talk about listening to the heart voice, it's an opportunity to really turn around and face that fear of other people's opinions, the FOPO. And I remember there's a music video by this band called Massive Attack. I can't remember the song, but the video was this guy, it opens up with this guy at night being chased through this sort of labyrinth of buildings by this mob. But it starts by being chased by one person and people, and then it grows into this whole mob. And they never explain why they're running away from these people, and you don't know what's going to happen once the people catch up to this guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he keeps running and running and just barely eluding them and turning a corner here and jumping a fence there. And then finally he gets cornered. He gets to this wall and there's nowhere to go. And so he stops running. And then when he stops running, the whole mob stops running.
Mm-hmm.
And he turns around and there's this sort of face off. And then one by one, the mob just starts disassembling. They just start going away. And he starts walking towards them and they scatter. And that's kind of how our fears are. The things that we think are the worst case scenario oftentimes are just figments of our own imagination that we're trying to run from. But we've never actually questioned, okay, well, what happens if I don't have this apartment? What happens if I don't have this job? I mean, I can get another job. I can find another apartment.
Yeah.
It's not the worst thing that ever happened. I still have my health. I still have my ability to figure things out. I still have my intuition. I still have all the things that led me to where I am now. So the raw materials are there. They're in place. And versus what happens if I take this leap? What happens if I bet on myself? What happens if and when it all works out? What position am I going to be in then? Mm-hmm. And so the possibilities of what would happen when I when I take the leap of faith outweigh the fear of what would happen if I were to lose whatever I think I was going to lose. And I think if we can get clear about the differences in those two approaches, we can make better choices for ourselves. And it's not to say that you should never be afraid of anything. I think fear is healthy. I think skepticism is also healthy.
Of course.
But if you're going to spend energy being afraid of things and being skeptical of things, at least devote the same energy to believing in yourself. I mean, nobody else is going to believe in you like you can believe in you. So why not? Why not at least put the same amount of energy into believing in yourself and taking action on that in the same way that you would take action on your fears?
Absolutely. That's the core of this podcast was that, right? Like so many of us have these beliefs about ourselves that we need to unlearn, our beliefs about the world even that don't serve us at the core, really. And I think that we need to get to the core of why they're there to be able to interrupt the them playing out in our lives, really. I know there was a book for you. I think it was Conversations with God that you found. I think was it at your girlfriend's house after college or maybe in the middle of college. That book had a really profound impact on you, and I think it was like one of the books that really led you into meditation. What was it about that book that had such a profound impact on you that led you down this path to begin with?
The Conversations with God. Yeah. So I mentioned growing up in Alabama. Alabama is kind of known as a part of the Bible Belt, which means it's heavily religious and there's not a lot of separation between church and state in that region of the country.
Yeah.
And so I grew up going to church every week. And then over the weekends, we had to go to choir rehearsal. And over the summers, we had to go to a vacation Bible study. Mm. So we were heavily involved in the church, but I never really felt connected to that church.
Yeah.
And or to religion itself. And I had a lot of questions that I didn't get a lot of good answers from in those experiences. Although I understand why my mother put us in those places because she thought it was good just for character building and things like that. And after I left Alabama, I really didn't want to have much to do with religion. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, when I was in my girlfriend's apartment many, many years later and waiting for her to get ready, and I saw that book, Conversations with God, I just thought, okay, this is another religious book. It's got God in the title. I'd seen it in some of the bookstores. So there was some buzz around it, but I never bothered to pick it up. And so that night, I was bored. I didn't have anything else better to do. So I was just picking it up and thumbing through it. And I saw that it was nothing like I imagined. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a religious book at all. It was a book about someone like me who also had a lot of questions, except this person had a lot more life experience than I did. And he was wondering why God, allowed certain bad things to happen to good people, and why his life was in shambles, even though he had good intentions and tried to do the right thing more often than not. And he was just asking questions about, just very practical questions about why things were not happening in the way that he thought they should happen. And then part of the story is when he first started doing this, he got this urge to take a legal pad and a writing utensil and start jotting down answers. And he realized that the answers are coming from a different place than where the questions were coming from. So the questions were coming from frustration, and it felt like the answers were coming from this place of love. And so he started to identify the answers as being transcribed by God. He called it God. And he kept the dialogue going, asking the question and then listening for an answer and writing it down. And that turned into the manuscript for Conversations with God. And so that book became a gateway book for me because it provided a lot of answers to those questions I mentioned that I didn't have answers to when I was younger, but they never went away. And so from there, I was voraciously reading other spiritual books and texts, and going into spiritual bookstores and just spending hours upon hours in those places, and then going to classes. I started taking like astral traveling classes and channeling classes, and trying to meet gurus, and fantasizing about going to places like India, and, so that's why when I met my meditation teacher in 2003, I had been studying. I had been studying the spiritual texts for a good 5 or 6 years at that point. I had dabbled in meditation. I had been trained to teach yoga at the time, and this is back before everyone and their mother was a yoga teacher. So it was still a unique and novel thing, and that's why when I met him, everything just sort of came together. And I credit that book with being the sort of gateway to my conscious spiritual path.
I know for you, when you went to India, you didn't pay for it in a way that it made sense. Like the path that led to India was a bit crazy. The story that led to that, the travel, the $500 voucher, every single time. I'd love for you to tell that story because I think that kind of reinforces so much of what you talk about in your book and everything that your mission is.
Yeah. Wow, you've done some really great research, James.
What I do.
I'm sure you hear that a lot, though, right?
Absolutely.
So that's actually a combination of a couple of stories, but the India story came about. Um, I had gotten I had gotten myself kind of wrapped up in this real estate quagmire back in 2006. Okay, I had really good credit, and this is one of the last real estate bubbles that ended up collapsing. And so they were giving everyone and their mother mortgages with no money down, just based on your credit score. So I I was being driven by greed. I wouldn't have admitted it at the time, but looking back now, I can admit it in hindsight. I was seeing myself as a real estate mogul. I was going to become the next whoever, real estate mogul was at the time, Donald Trump or somebody. And I acquired three income properties, but I was upside down in the mortgages, which means I owed more than um, than the properties were worth. So I wasn't smart about it. I got myself into those situations from day one, and I was thinking that the property values were going to increase, and they did not. They ended up plummeting over those next couple of years. But because I was in real estate, I was getting all kinds of credit card offers in the mail. And meanwhile, I'm teaching yoga full time. That was my main job, teaching yoga. I was making like $800 a week before taxes. So I wasn't making a whole lot of money. And there was the thing I'd been waiting for, my spirit had been waiting for, was this meditation teacher training, which was taking place in India. And the training was $14,000 total. and my bank balance at the time was probably $2,000 or $3,000. But I just trusted that everything was going to work out. So I kept taking the next step. I filled out the application. Part of the application was, do you have any problems coming up with the $14,000? I said, nope, I'll be good. Even though I didn't have anything close to that in my bank account at the time. And, there were some other requirements. You had to submit this and do that and get the visa and blah, blah, blah. So I was doing all that. I was going through all the steps, still had no money in my account, and just trusted that it was going to happen. And then I got this credit card. It was like a balance transfer of $14,000 that you could use for 18 months, 0 interest. And then after that, there was going to be this sort of loan shark interest rate that would be charged. And ordinarily, I would get an offer like that, because I got offers like that over those couple years that I've been in real estate. And I just ignored them because I'm not big into putting myself into debt, even though I had just done that big time with the real estate stuff. But when I got this $14,000 thing, and it was like 2 days before the money was due to the training, I just knew that this was what I was supposed to use it for. And so I promptly deposited the check, and I used it to pay for the training. And I ended up being able to pay it off after about a month and a half. So, this is something that the financial gurus, the Dave Ramseys of the world, would 100% red flag. You do not do this. And I'm sure if I didn't use it, I could have had a story about that time back in 2007 where I didn't get taken advantage of by some predatory loan from a bank. And, that could be the story. But instead, I've got this wonderful story of taking this massive leap of faith, which allowed me to then live my purpose, help thousands of people, perhaps impact positively millions of people through my books and my talks and other work and podcast. And I think that's a much more inspired story for myself as well as for anyone else. So again, everyone has an opinion, everyone has an idea about what it takes to be, quote, successful. But at the end of the day, you have to define success for yourself, and you have to make your most important decisions from your heart and not from your head. And it's not to say that your head or your ego is not important or relevant. It absolutely is, but it's better used to serve your heart as opposed to allowing your head to call the shots. Mm-hmm. And then when it's convenient to follow your heart, when you have certainty to follow your heart, but letting the head run the show, that's going to get you into some pretty dramatic situations that are going to be very difficult to get yourself out of.
Yeah. You talk about the scary yes, and you do it usually around your birthday most years. Mm-hmm. And that's like, that was a scary yes. Traveling, almost, I feel like it has to be the scary yes, right? Like, I feel like the trusting your intuition is like is trusting your heart when your mind's trying to tell you no so much, but trusting your heart is the yes when it feels like it's probably it should be a no to everyone else. It's a yes to yourself, and that's what you're saying. When everyone else can say it's a no, you have to be able to trust yourself and say yes. How do you build that intuition within yourself? I know that you talk about the stillness practice. That's really the first part of your book. Like, how do we build that stillness practice, one, and then also be able to really trust that intuition within ourselves?
Yeah, building the stillness practice, which is for me primarily meditation, mm-hmm. It takes care of the second part, which is trusting your intuition. Yeah. So what the stillness practice does is it turns up the volume on your intuition. So you don't have to experience it as a still small voice and hope you hear it correctly, and then hope that it's giving you the right information, and then hope that you take the hop of faith which turns into a leap of faith, and hope that you land in, there's a lot of hoping. There's a lot of hoping that can happen if you can't hear it very well. But as you turn up the volume on it, it goes from a still small voice to a loud, annoying voice.
Mm-hmm.
Now, imagine if somebody comes and knocks on your door, someone who you owe money to, and you've been successfully eluding them, and they knock on your door and they say, "If you don't pay us the money by 3 o'clock, you're gonna break your fucking knees, and you're never gonna walk again." You are going to take that message much more seriously than if
Yeah.
it's just a little whisper that you dreamt about, in the night. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't happen. I don't know. But that's what you want the heart voice to sound like. You want it to be like that loan shark, obviously lovingly,
Of course.
but you want it to be that clear and that serious, so
Mm-hmm.
you cannot you cannot brush it off. And that's what happens with the stillness practice. Is it turns the volume up on the heart voice so that it's absolutely unambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to doing the right thing, when it comes to going above and beyond, starting over as many times, your heart voice will tell you, you get start over. This is not right. Start over again. Start over again. Keep practicing. And then you realize that through starting over in whatever project you're working on to get it right, what that means is you're getting it aligned. And through that process of starting over, you're learning. You're not wasting your time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we're outcome oriented, we think about that starting over. Oh, I'm wasting my time. I'm getting behind. This is becoming an obstacle, right? But when you're process oriented, which the stillness practice helps you become, you realize, oh, I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm getting stretched right now. And it's kind of like, David Goggins, who David Goggins is, obviously, right?
Of course.
So when he first brought Jesse Itzler, who was the guy that wrote
Mm-hmm.
that book about Goggins without calling him by name, he had hired Goggins to come to his house and for 30 days and to train him,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing what it was going to be like. But he had just witnessed Goggins run, a 100-mile race with just Ritz crackers and some water or something crazy.
Yeah.
And so he knew it was going to be extreme, but he didn't know how extreme it was going to be. And he said the first day Goggins shows up, they go to the pull-up bar at his house, and Goggins goes, jump up and grab the pull-up bar and do as many pull-ups as you can do. And he was able to bang out like 8 pull-ups, and he felt good about himself. And then Goggins goes, okay, let's rest for a minute. He says, okay, now jump up and do some more pull-ups. Just go to failure. And he was able to do like 5 and barely 5. And then they kept repeating that. And then the next set, he was able to do like 2. And then the next set, he was able to do like 1, but he was wiggling. Mm-hmm. And so he had done a total of like, 15 pull-ups. Mm-hmm. And he was completely winded. And Goggins says, all right, we're going to go to 100. And of course, he's thinking to himself, there's no way I can do 100 pull-ups. Mm-hmm. I'm tapped out. I can't do any more. And Goggins goes, we take all day if we need to, but we're going to get to 100. Mm-hmm. And so eventually he gets to all 100 a few hours later, taking a break, as many breaks as he needs. And the point was that Goggins was teaching him was when you think you're tapped out, you've only accessed about 40% of your potential. And there's another 60% of your potential that's unaccessed that you get to access. And so I forgot where I was going with that, but that's kind of the idea behind taking these leaps of faith and trying to access our outer potential. Mm-hmm. And being process oriented as opposed to being outcome oriented, because if you're just outcome oriented, you are going to feel tapped out. But when you're in the process of it all, then you can really take your time with it and understand that you're not wasting time by moving to failure and then getting up and doing it again and again and again and as many times as it takes, because through that process you are expanding your potential. And once you do that in one area of your life, you're going to be able to apply that to other areas of your life as well, and just be more confident in your approach.
Yeah. And I think too, in the world that we live in, I think like this idea of hustle culture, and even David Goggins is like an idea of this. It's like we feel like we need to be moving every second of the day, and we feel like washing clothes, we feel like making breakfast, we feel like the little things are a waste of time. And you talk about this in your book as well, where like there's no throwaway moments. Like you have to be able to really be intentional about these times. And I've been able to realize this where I meditate in the morning, and it's allowed me to be so much more intentional with the times throughout my day where I feel like, oh, this is a throwaway moment, but it doesn't feel like it because I'm so much more present within those moments in time. Dive into, when did that become prominent to you? When you realized that there's no throwaway moments? Was it when you started like hand washing your clothes when you were traveling?
Hmm. Not really. I mean, the hand washing of the clothes um, was a necessity if I wanted to travel as
Right.
lightly
Yeah.
as I desired. But I think the experience that really brought that idea home of no throwaway moments was, and I've talked about this on other interviews, but it's a good story of going to this yoga class one morning, driving to this yoga class that I was teaching. And I had been making this commute, hundreds of times. And this morning there was all this traffic, and there was never traffic along this road.
Mhm.
So this is in Los Angeles. So it's not unusual for there to be traffic, but on this particular route, it was unusual. It was very unusual to have as much traffic as I was experiencing. So I didn't budget for this in my commute, and it looked like I was going to be late to the class that I was teaching. So, like any good Los Angeles driver, I zigzagged down to the other street that was the alternative route, and
Of
there
course.
was traffic on this street. Now, this is highly unusual for there to be traffic on both of these streets
Mhm.
going in this particular direction. And I got to the intersection where if there was an obstruction of both of those streets, it would have been apparent at this particular intersection, and there was nothing. And then right after the intersection, the traffic cleared up. It was fine. But I ended up getting to the class like 10 minutes late, which I was so annoyed about because I'm a stickler for punctuality. And there was nothing I could blame it on. There was no construction, there was no accident, there was no nothing. I looked for whatever I could find that was blocking the traffic. I didn't see anything.
Mhm.
And I get there, and everyone in the class who showed up on time, because I never really was late, so everyone
Yeah.
was sort of trained to be there on time. They were all huddled in the back of the room,
Mhm.
and as I walk in, I feel this crunching underneath my flip flops, and I look down, and there's a million shards of broken glass on the floor. And I look up at the front wall, and the front wall was all mirrors. There was a missing pane of mirror, which was like 9 feet tall by about 3 feet wide. So
Mhm.
that's like 1 meter wide by 3 meters tall.
Mhm.
And it was empty. That space was empty. And so they told me what happened. They said, look, at about 10 minutes ago,
Right when you would have,
the
yeah.
mirror just somehow just dislodged and it came crashing down. And so we're sweeping it up now. We're sorry, but you're gonna have to wait a little bit to start your class. And I was like, holy crap! I'm thinking to myself, holy shit! 10 minutes ago, I would have started this class, and I would have been sitting right in front of where that mirror came crashing down. So as it turned out, that phantom traffic jam that I was secretly, cursing to myself in the car,
Yeah.
was actually saving me from having a very unlucky start to my day. And so that's what I mean by no throwaway moments. If you're being inconvenienced in some way, your flight was canceled, or somebody's running late 10 or 15 minutes, or you can't, the customer service is giving you the runaround. Like, these are moments where it's very easy to get into reaction mode.
Mhm.
And it's not to say that a reaction is never merited,
Of course.
but what that experience taught me to do was to give life the benefit of the doubt and to remember that any sort of rejection is probably a form of protection
Mhm.
from something much worse, right? I've had women that I've dated throughout my life and who've ghosted me, believe it or not. No, they've ghosted me, or it just didn't work out for whatever reason, and then years and years later come to find out, oh yeah, that was I was depressed, or I was on drugs, or there was something that was going on,
Mhm.
and I took it personally. But what actually happened was, it wasn't about me at all. It was about something they were going through.
Yeah.
And so you get to see with more life experience that almost always nature's rejection is nature's protection. So trust life, that there are no throwaway moments. Everything is happening for you, not to you.
Mhm. It's so powerful. I always say that my life changed when I stopped asking why is this happening to me, and I started asking how is this happening for me. Right? I
It's a
asked that
very
question.
powerful question. Very powerful question to ask.
You change your questions and you really change the way that you look at life because things like that, and you start to realize like, oh, that is true. I, the I When I went through like going through listening to podcasts that you were on and all of that kind of stuff, doing research for this, when I heard you talk about that, the first thing that went through my mind was the mindset that I've taken on was I don't know, because in moments like that we think, oh, I know exactly where I'm supposed to be. I know that I should be where I should be there on time. I should be doing this. But realistically, we don't know what's happening at that moment. We don't know that that's what happened at that time. And we don't know what that's going to lead to in the future, right? Like the relationships that didn't work out, we didn't know that what they would have led to in the future. And so I always take on the mindset that I really don't know what this is going to lead to in the future. And the, the the world's probably serving me in some way, and I have to take on that mindset, or at least it serves me to take on that mindset. So it's really, really powerful stuff that you take on that. And another one that you speak on in the book is that you don't really need to follow your passion, but you need to follow your curiosities, and your passion is going to find you. Uh, I love that perspective, and I think that more people need to take on that perspective, and it's going to make life a hell of a lot easier to figure things out. When did you really realize that that was prominent for you in your life?
I'll tell you another story to
Please.
illustrate it. Just a real world scenario that I actually experienced. So I was teaching meditation back in starting in 2007, full time.
Yeah, 2007.
And one of my main concerns, because I'm not a monk, right? I'm a regular person. I'm
Yeah.
dating. I have an apartment. I got bills to pay.
Hmm.
So I need to teach as many people as possible. I need to make myself as available as possible. I need to give the best experience that I can give and all the things that, people who run their own businesses think about. I'm a
Hmm.
solopreneur who happens to teach meditation.
Right.
And I have a friend of mine who I talk with on occasion about business practices, best practices, marketing, should I do this, should I do that, etc. So that's happening in the background as I'm just living my life, going about, my days, weeks, and months teaching meditation, etc. And I find myself in New York City um, one week teaching meditation, and I have this class in the evening, and I'm walking back to my Airbnb after class, and it's about 9:50, and I'm going through this area of Manhattan called Union Square, and there's a big, massive five-story Barnes and Noble on the north end of this part of Manhattan,
Hmm.
and I hear this voice saying, "Go and get a Rubik's cube and learn how to solve it."
Oh yeah.
And again, this is something it had nothing to do with my day to day life. I wasn't honestly before walking through there. I probably hadn't really thought much about Rubik's cubes since I was a kid, when I used to take them apart and put them back together because I couldn't understand how to solve it.
Right. Yeah.
So, but they were easy to kind of take apart. You just take one of them out, and then you can take all of them out and solve it
Hmm.
again that way. So, anyways, grown ass man in his 40s now, walking through Union Square, and I get this intuitive hit. And again, I got the loan shark voice of my heart is like a loan. It's like a unambiguous, loud. Go get a Rubik's cube and
Hmm.
learn how to solve it. So the store I checked, the store was going to close in 10 minutes. So I went over there. I was like half a block away, and I knew where the Rubik's cubes were because I've been in that store many many times over the years. And I got the last one and I bought it, and then I went back to my Airbnb and I went online and I started to Google how do you solve a Rubik's cube so I can learn the method, whatever it was.
Hmm.
And turns out you don't have to be a genius to learn how to solve Rubik's cube. You just have to learn the sequence. There's a specific sequence that anyone who solves Rubik's cube has to learn, and it's a series of turns and twists. And so I started practicing. And then my friend, who I talk about marketing stuff with, he calls me and he's just checking to see what's going on. And I tell him, "Hey, I've got this Rubik's cube and I'm learning how to solve it." And he goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Yeah, I just bought a Rubik's cube and I'm learning how to solve it." He goes, "Man, why are you wasting your time with a Rubik's cube? you need to be working on getting more people into the meditation classes and working on your business plan and all these things.
Mhm.
So I just kind of ignored him because my heart voice told me to do it, and so my heart voice is the boss here, not
Amen.
somebody else's opinion.
Yep.
And I kept practicing and practicing and practicing, and eventually, over the next couple of days, I learned how to solve the Rubik's Cube. Now I'm carrying the cube around with me everywhere I go because it's turned into this cool little party trick. If you solve a Rubik's Cube on the New York subway, everybody is gawking and paying attention, and they're projecting onto you genius status. So I'm like, this is cool.
Yeah.
And as I'm doing it and I'm teaching my meditation training, something clicks. I realize a connection. I was like, oh my God, the way you solve a Rubik's Cube is very similar to the way meditation works. So the way meditation works is it works in layers. You start with the foundational layer of rest, then your digestive system comes back online if that's been out of whack. Then your reproduction system comes back online. Then your immune system. Then and it keeps going up to your happiness. Then your happiness starts to become more stable. And with the cube, the way you solve it is from the bottom row, and then the middle row, and then the top row, and then all the sides come together, and then the final layer is the final side gets solved, and that's kind of like the same thing. And I just kept thinking about this connection. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then I got curious again. What happens if I make a video? I never made a video before. So I went and learned how to use my point and shoot camera at the time to create a video about this connection that I was fascinated by. And meanwhile, I'm living on the flight line to the Santa Monica airport in Venice. And so I was trying to describe it before the next airplane came flying overhead, making all this noise. And it wasn't enough time. So I ended up having to do captions, which this is back in 2007 or 2008 or something like that. So I had to go to iMovie, I had to learn how to do captions and then put a little music. So I had to basically learn video production.
Yeah.
But I didn't mind it because I was curious about it, right? Anyways, to make a long story long, I upload the video, and the video ends up going viral in the meditation community. Everybody's talking about this Rubik's Cube video. Oh my God, that's such an interesting analogy, blah, blah, blah. Gets shared around. Guess what ended up happening? More people came to learn how to meditate as a result of that video. So it's like the heart voice, and it created the curiosity to go and solve the Rubik's Cube, and then the curiosity to make the connection between meditation and the cube, and then the curiosity to create the video and figure all that out. And at no point was it necessarily easy learning how to solve a cube, practicing enough times to do it, and then making a video, turning my living room into a production studio with a point and shoot camera, etc. Learning YouTube. I had to learn all these things, but it was all, the payoff was I got what I was ultimately wanting to get from thinking about marketing, but I got it in a more adventurous and imaginative way than just kind of, trying to follow the same formula that everybody else was following. And this was a unique thing that only I could do. No one else could do that. So that's what I mean by follow your curiosity, and your purpose will find you. You don't have to sit around and think about, what's my purpose? I don't know what my purpose is. Just do the things that you're naturally curious about, and understand that those things are not going to be easy to do, but just keep being curious, keep being process oriented as opposed to outcome oriented. Don't think it's going to somehow tie into anything else. The connections will occur to you when it's ripe, when it's time for them to occur to you, and then you'll get the next step at that point. You won't know what the next step is. I didn't know the YouTube thing was going to happen when I first got the Rubik's Cube. I didn't know any of the things that people were going to come to learn how to meditate as a result of it. I was just mastering that first step. That was what I was curious about. And so that's the invitation for all of us, is just to follow our curiosity innocently, just like a child would follow their curiosity, and just kind of see what happens. Just be open to all the possibilities.
We go away from our childlike curiosity so much, and you're someone that has taken that that mindset and then taking on the just I'm inspired by that. I'm gonna go to that. I'm inspired by that. I'm gonna go to that. I'm gonna do that thing. And you do it so well. And even with traveling too, like you you've gone down from a 40 ounce to smaller and smaller, and you keep getting smaller. I love to know, like, throughout your time traveling, what's the lesson that you've learned most about yourself throughout your time traveling?
That you don't need as much as you think you need. That's really the ultimate lesson, is that you can do more with less, actually. And it's not to say I'm going to travel like this forever, right? But for now, it's still, I'm still curious about it. And there will be a day where I may not be curious about it anymore, in which case I may go the other way with it and really nest and root and settle down. But um, the other thing is that I've learned that this is not a path for everybody. This is a path that resonates with me. But before you dismiss, oh, I don't know about the spiritual minimalism thing because I don't want to live from a backpack.
Mhm.
The real opportunity is, what's your version of that? In other words, what's something that you're curious about that challenges your status quo? Because if you want to grow, you got to get out of the status quo. The status quo is not going to make you reach your potential. And when you get to the border of your status of your comfort zone, which is really the gateway to your growth zone, there are going to be some signs along that perimeter, and some of the signs may read, "You're not good enough." They may read, "You're too old." They may read, "You don't have enough money. What are you doing?" They may read, "It's much safer to go back to where you were," and all the things that you hear, like my buddy who pushed back on the Rubik's Cube thing. Like, what are you doing? You're a grown man. You should be thinking about business right now. You got to save more money. You're not getting any younger. Those are all of the signs that are in on the perimeter of your comfort zone. And so when you start hearing that, that's not a sign to turn back and go back to the couch. That is an indication that you've arrived at the gateway to your growth zone. So the moment you step beyond that, you're going to start to access more of your potential. And I like to take the burn the boats approach.
Mhm.
Don't even give yourself an option to turn back. That's why I gave my friend that $4,000 check with the
Yeah.
contract, because I didn't want the option to turn back. I need to be choiceless in moving forward. And so you are responsible for putting yourself in the best position to move forward. And no one can do this for you. You have to do it for yourself. And you know what is going to motivate you and what's not going to motivate you. So find that, and then you can replicate that with anything else that you ultimately want to do.
Usually we do need to do that because we need to put our back against the wall, or we're always going to find a way to get in our own way, it seems. What lesson has,
100%.
what lesson has taken you the longest to learn?
Mm. I'm still learning a lot of lessons, but I would say, you know, the idea that I've written that abundance is already there. What we're doing is we're creating access and limitations to it. So when you start to understand that it's not really ever about you and someone else when you're trying to make this exchange or negotiate something,
Mhm.
the person you're really negotiating with is you. It's between you and you, right? The person that looks like they're on the other end of the table is just a projection of you. It's an extension of you. And so what you want to do is you want to create a win-win solution, as much as possible, as opposed to thinking that you're getting something for nothing, or that you're going to come out in a better position than they're going to be in. Because that's just not a very sustainable way to live a spiritually aligned life. And that's something I think we all still grapple with on a regular basis. And it doesn't have to do with money. It could be with love. If you're in a relationship and you guys get into one of your relationship fights, and you start thinking to yourself, well, I'm going to wait for them to go first and apologize, or I'm going to wait for them to go first and be compassionate, or I'm going to wait for them to go first and be generous. It's not you and them, it's you and you. It's you and you. And so you have to give the thing that you ultimately want to receive. And if you do that enough times and you see that there's no reciprocity, then that may be an indication that this relationship has run its course and it's time for you to move on. And then we may start to think, oh, well, this is the last chance I'll get to be with someone like that. And, that's a story you're telling yourself that's based on, the people chasing you in that music video. If you stop and turn around and move in the other direction, you may find that the fears that you are using to shackle yourself to this unsustainable experience will ultimately go away. And that maybe there is a better situation out there if you're open to that.
So powerful, and it's so very true. There's one last question I ask every guest, and encapsulates what I try to do with this podcast. You almost answered it right there, and it might even be your answer. But the question is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
What belief am I unlearning? That is a really, really good question. Um, I would say that, when I think about the principles of spiritual minimalism, these are principles that I'm still working through for myself. So, just to review them quickly: cultivating your inner happiness, making your most important decisions from your heart, not from your head, no throwaway moments, give what you want to receive, finding comfort in discomfort, and giving yourself the freedom of choicelessness. If I had to say which, because I'm still in the process with all of those,
Or
but if I had to say which one was the one that challenges me the most, I would say that it is. I would say that it is. I think giving what you want to receive. I would say that's that one. I would
mm,
say it's that one. So I guess I'm still unlearning that there's no free lunch in the universe. That nothing of quality comes for without giving something of quality. I'm still learning that one.
absolutely, Light. Thank you so much for coming on the show. All of your links will be in the show notes for those that need to find you. Where can they find you, Light?
The central hub for all things Light Watkins is lightwatkins.com. That's my website. And then on the socials, it's at Light Watkins.
Thank you so much.
100%. Thank you.